Now, amongst many huge stories that have been rolling out this week, the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell should have been right up there. But I don't know about you. I get the feeling the mainstream media are doing their best to pretend that it isn't happening. A scion of the commercial capitalist aristocracy is on trial in a New York courtroom, charged with really quite heinous, sordid, dirty offences that could send her to prison for 80 years. Moreover, some of the household names of the last 30 years, some of the richest and most powerful people in the world are being name-checked hourly in the courtroom. I was following a number of outlets on Twitter to get an hour-by-hour play-by-play until Twitter closed them down. But they can't close us down, and they'll never close down my next guest, Kirby Summers, who has done so much to keep this story in the public eye, and whose books now on Ghislaine Maxwell are a great read and rapidly becoming bestsellers. And she joins us again. Kirby, thank you for doing so. Just summarize the kind of week that Ghislaine Maxwell has had, if you would.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me again.
Welcome.
Well, it's been a very interesting 2 weeks. Mainstream media, the very few who are reporting, are busy on Twitter, making up lies. Oh, there's a lot of coverage, and there was a photograph taken by a New York Times reporter for the New York Times of 3 people in front of the courtroom, 3 reporters. They said, look at the crowd. Well, the crowd of 3. So this is the biggest criminal case of our lifetime, in my opinion. I'm going to remind everyone of what she is charged of, but it is the least covered. I think the only people that are covering it are people like yourself, me, and some random people on Twitter. Would you agree?
Yes, and it's bizarre. The Rittenhouse trial was wall-to-wall, live courtroom footage, and that's been true of so many cases that had less of an international impact than this case.
Agree. What happened is that on November 2nd, the COVID restriction for the courts was changed. But it was then given over to the judges to make the determination whether or not they would do what they had done from the time that she appeared on July the 14th of 2020 for the first bail hearing. I called in, many people called in throughout the course of this trial. It's still a federal trial. Federal trials are not televised, but you can call in, especially during COVID. But isn't that interesting that on November 2nd, just very soon before the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is scheduled to begin, which was November 29th, the law changed, giving again the judge the ability to deny or accept. And Judge Nathan decided there's going to be no call-in. And I don't know if I need to remind your audience, but our current president, Joe Biden, did give Judge Nathan a nomination for the Second Court, the circuit of a Second Circuit Court, just 1 week before the trial began.
That's so like a promotion, in other words.
Yes, it's actually the one level beneath the highest court. So that happened. But so the charges are, to remind everyone, she is charged with 1 count of enticing a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. That carries a maximum sentence of 5 years. There's 1 count of conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, and that's another 5 years. There's 1 count of transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. That's 10 years. There's one count of conspiracy to transport a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and that carries a sentence of 5 years. So if she is convicted, you're looking at Ghislaine, 40 to plus years in prison. However, this is just the first trial. I don't know if many people are aware, but there are two counts of perjury which were part of this initial trial, but which they requested, Ghislaine Maxwell's attorneys requested they be put into a second trial. So after this trial is over, win or lose, Ghislaine Maxwell is still in jail because the second trial has to begin for the perjury.
And what were the big names and big allegations or big evidence, if you like, that emerged in the last week, Kirby?
Well, I'll tell you, what was interesting is that Juan Alessi, who was Jeffrey Epstein's, you can call him his house man, his butler, his housekeeper, mentioned big names. The pilots who have been with Jeffrey Epstein since the 1990s. One was with him commencing 1991. Another was with him commencing 1997 until, the very end. They named big names, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, you name it. I mean, they named many, many prominent people. However, the pilots were made comments that I personally do not believe. They said when they were questioned as to whether or not they saw anything inappropriate on Jeffrey Epstein's planes, and they both said they saw nothing. They saw nothing. They heard nothing. They saw nothing. But the way they described it, that they saw nothing, is that if the bathroom is in the rear of the airplane, so that they would have to go to the rear of the airplane. However, from the victims, from the court testimonies, from even myself knowing some of the victims, the word is that they were abused in every place, not just on Jeffrey Epstein's island, not just in his homes, but in his vehicles and definitely on the plane. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein went so far as to put padded carpeting on the floor for orgies on the airplane.
Wow.
So for those so the two pilots to say that was so disingenuous. I thought, okay, perjury, but will they be held to account? I don't think so. The whole thing has just been, it's heart-wrenching to see the four women who are now, two of them were 14. They're 40, 41 years old now, waiting a very long time for justice. So the other one was 17. And this is interesting. The one that was 17, Ghislaine Maxwell met her initially in Paris with one of her friends, one of Ghislaine Maxwell's friends, who went to school with her at Oxford University. So that he is a much older man. And to me, I found that really interesting. I think you read Ghislaine Maxwell, An Unauthorized Biography.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, and all of the interesting people that I dug out from getting scrubbed from the internet forever. So that it was interesting to me that someone that Ghislaine Maxwell met in Oxford was dating a 17-year-old girl, right? And then, it introduces her to Ghislaine Maxwell. They go on to meet up with her in London. Ghislaine Maxwell, because this girl, she's 17, she's starting to go to school, and Ghislaine befriends her, invites her for tea. So she treats her with a little bit more class, let's say, than the other girls that she would just sort of, jump in and sort of take advantage of. So what was clear was that she really used her charm and her the illusion that she was their friend, interested in their lives. For all of them, she made them promises that she would help their careers, that Jeffrey Epstein could help them achieve whatever they wanted, that they needed to help. But it was heartbreaking because her defense attorneys are animals. The way they spoke to these girls, and the 2 points that the attorneys are attacking them on is their ability to remember. So they're claiming you're misremembering. That's not what you said, in such and such a year. And then they pull up documents, and instead of making it easy, they confuse them. There's like, oh, line this, sort of like a very legalese conversation with a victim. They're just normal people. They're not lawyers to know it's this line and this very, very unusual behavior. So they're attacking them on that front, and they're attacking them. And by the way, before I say this, I want to say that this is a federal case, or at least it should be, right? But so there's no money. The victims are not testifying to get money at the end of this trial. This is just to put Ghislaine behind bars and make her pay for her crimes, which are severe. But the 4 victims were completely slut-shamed, I'm going to use that term, for having taken a settlement from the Epstein's Victims Compensation Fund, which they were almost forced into. So to get into the compensation fund, some of these victims had lawsuits against Ghislaine Maxwell.
Why was that admissible, given that these victims, having taken the money from the compensation fund, had nothing further to gain from giving evidence in a criminal trial where, as you say, no financial reward is the result, even if you are entirely vindicated?
Yes, what they're trying to do from my perspective is this is a New York jury. So I have my spies in the courtroom because I figured, this is still Robert Maxwell's daughter. I might as well have my spies. I don't want to go to the courtroom every day. So I have my spies. And it's my understanding that the jury is very New Yorky. And so what that means is that in New York City, the only people that really end up going to jury duty are hardworking people or retired people of different ethnicities. And so I think their strategy has been to say, oh, she got $1.5 million. That's not insignificant. So that to say big numbers like that in front of a jury that's going to decide the fate of Ghislaine Maxwell, in my opinion, I think that it's to make them look at the victims not in a sympathetic way, but sort of as they're only, they only decided to say bad things about Ghislaine Maxwell because they wanted that money. But that's not true, because what happened was, in order to get that money, they had to then withdraw their lawsuit against Ghislaine, which would have produced what we really want to see. It would have produced discovery. It would have produced what Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit produced, which is most of the information that we have access to. That's why we know about Prince Andrew. That's why we have that photograph of Prince Andrew and Virginia and Ghislaine. So all of that discovery is out the window because they were told by the administrator of the fund, well, you can take this money. It's a sure thing. And by the way, they would have gotten more if they won, like Virginia, Ghislaine settled. So they were misled, frankly, into accepting money that really they didn't really need to take. But they were told, oh, the jury, it'll go on forever, blah, blah. The other thing I want to bring to mind is she's still being allowed to do things in court that no one else that I have ever seen in a courtroom do. So, for example, during the breaks, she sends notes back and forth to her sister Isabel, to her brother Kevin. Kevin and Isabel send notes to her. I mean, her brother Kevin will lean forward in his seat, remove his glasses, look intently, you know, sort of like almost, you can tell when someone is sending you bad energy and sitting in the courtroom and you're a traumatized victim reliving the worst years of your life. And you have this older man, because now what, he's almost 70, I think.
Well, they are Maxwell's. The apples didn't fall all that far from the tree. Kirby, thank you for that update. We'll speak to you again, I'm sure, later in the proceedings.